Liberal Currents presents Half the Answer with your hosts, Caitlin M. Green and Trent R. Nelson.
Well, happy days are here again, and understanding a question is half an answer, and this is, of course, Half the Answer with your hosts, Trent R. Nelson and Caitlin M. Green, and you know what we get up to here, us being editors. Caitlin, of course, linguist, and we're here to ask the tough questions. But first, you gotta understand what they are, and that's why we are asking experts and all of the most brilliant and interesting people their takes on various topics. Well, Caitlin, it's always a pleasure. Who have you brought with you today?
I'm so excited, Trent. I have brought Katie back, Katie Talhelm, the librarian.
Hey.
So Katie's a librarian who works in Texas, and we also know of her amazing work with the it's the Academic Freedom. I didn't even write it down this time. I was like, I'll just wing it. The Committee on Academic Freedom and our intellectual freedom, right? Yeah, because you're a librarian. You're all about the intellect. And so, you know, we were so nice to you last time, and I've come here now to really pin you down, okay, on parents' rights, because as a mother, I am really concerned about the kinds of books that these children are being given access to. And so that's what we're here for, really. Just kidding. Hi, Katie. How are you?
I'm doing great. Always happy to talk about parental rights and how they relate to public libraries or really libraries in general. Really,
God, you're so
honestly, just
diplomatic.
so the fight for intellectual freedom versus indoctrination and parental rights is honestly really one of the most interesting and frustrating topics I have to come across in my work. So.
Well, the way I see it is you're protecting my rights as a parent to not have my children deprived of material that could educate or enrich them, right? Like that's
Right.
basically how it
Yeah,
is.
yeah. Basically, honestly, I don't think any librarian is out there like against the parental rights to parent anybody's children. Like we're not here to be a replacement for you. We're not here to tell your kids what to believe or anything like that. We're just here to give you information about a subject. Whether that subject is something that you as a parent don't agree with or think is inappropriate for your child, then that's a conversation you should have with your child, and not necessarily like demonize your librarian for passing out a book on it.
No, we're gonna demonize them. Those hardworking librarians, they're monsters.
Katie, you're keeper of the tomes.
Mhm.
You're not indoctrinator of the child. You are a guardian of the manuscripts of the books of human knowledge. Certainly, that has to count for something, as we wish to guard children from being dumb. No?
You would think, but unfortunately, there is a very strong sentiment amongst some of the right wing ideology think tanks out there that by providing access or, honestly, in some cases, having them accidentally stumble upon it is somehow infringing on somebody's parental rights to have their children believe a certain thing. Um, we in obviously in the state of Texas, like we're very big on kind of pushing that sort of right wing ideology, so much that the past Texas legislative session was focused primarily on passing bills that infringed upon people's right to information, and they're not going to call it a book ban, because they're like, well, we're not banning books, we're just protecting the children. We're ensuring that they're not going to come into contact with harmful material.
Right.
But they never quite like specify what that means, or they do so in terms like we're already protecting them against it. Like
Right.
the big content push was sexual content, and sexual proclivities and that kind of stuff. And basically, they pushed through legislation that focused on restricting a minor's access to content that might depict some kind of sexual activity.
Mhm.
Now, there are there are oral arguments on record now about some of the language that was in these bills, and you're talking about restricting kids' access to, say, like, material that contains bestiality. And I'm like, yeah, we were already doing that. Like, that is not a thing that exists in a
Right.
library for children.
What?
Um, like, there's no book in a children's section or a young adult section or a teen section that is going to contain that. There's no, like,
There's no, like, Fido is my boyfriend? That's not, like, a popular children's book? That's so weird.
But Katie, well then the obvious question has to be, if those things don't exist in the library
Mhm.
already, well then what would be the point of making legislation to ban something that didn't exist?
So the point behind it is that when you use these broad, like the broad language that they're using, for example, um, to kind of define like you know, um, what harmful sexual content is, for example, it's basically saying like, well, if we're going to define it this way, then there's like a whole broad spectrum of things that can fit
Right.
underneath that umbrella.
Mhm.
So when they say sexual content, it could be as far reaching as, say, like a character in a children's book who's not wearing pants.
Mhm.
Right.
And they have, they're nude, for example. And it could be something like Winnie the Pooh. And, like, Winnie the Pooh is famous for not wearing pants.
Yeah.
But
He
because
is.
he is nude, like, they're saying that that's sexual content.
Well,
Right.
this is something that Caitlin and I spoke about recently in a discussion, right? That not every function that is done naked, such as going into a changing room,
Yeah.
is by nature sexual. Winnie the
Mhm.
Pooh not wearing pants and looking for honey with Tigger, it cannot be conceived of in any other way than rambunctious fun
In
with your
fact,
friends.
Winnie the Pooh is the weird one for wearing a shirt, right? Like, Tigger doesn't wear a shirt, Rabbit doesn't wear a shirt, Kanga I don't know what's going on with Piglet's midsection, if that's, like, their body or or an outfit or
It's a
what.
unitard or like a
Yeah, right.
leopard.
Just ready to do gymnastics at any moment.
Well, that's why they're friends. They both are the only ones wearing clothing, of course.
Right. But also there's, like, a lot of books in the genre of, like, I Love You, My Sweet Baby, that are, like, board books or, like, small children
Right.
books that are from the perspective of a parent or, like, whatever your grown-up is in your family that's like, "You are the most wonderful baby in the world, and here's the ways that I love you." And a lot of times those pictures that accompany it are, like, a baby with no clothes on or
Mhm.
whatever. Like,
Right.
honestly, when I was little, when I was potty training, my parents read me some toilet training book that involved a little girl named Prudence, and she in one of the pictures literally bends over and like shows her entire butthole in the in the picture, right? Because she's like telling you about like here's where pee comes out, here's where poop comes out, and now I'm
Right.
gonna do it in this potty, right?
Yeah.
And it's like it's a toilet training thing. um there's the most recent Miss Rachel video actually
Mhm.
involves a puppet that's got no pants on, because in the beginning they take off his diaper to be like, okay, Bean, here you go, you're gonna use a potty
Right.
now, and he spends the whole episode not wearing a diaper because that's one way to do toilet training, right, is to like
Mhm.
never have anything on the bits so that you can rush and like not
It,
waste any time.
it's a projection of their hypersexualization of
Yes.
things onto the society.
Yeah.
They're strange about all of this very normal human stuff. And
Yes.
so it's all on us that we are enabling uh,
Right.
Prudence to illustrate where feces comes from. I mean,
Well,
just
yeah.
outrageous.
Why don't we talk about some of the specific bills that passed in Texas recently, which is your state, Katie? So, what are the ones that happened this legislative session?
So, the big one that passed was the one we actually talked about in the last episode I was on, which was Senate Bill 412. Senate Bill
Okay.
412 is the bill that struck language from the Texas Penal Code that applies affirmative defense against providing material to children, saying that, like, you can no longer use an educational, informational, medical, whatever defense in terms of supplying somebody with this type of material. So for example, if I as a librarian gave a teenager a book about puberty and they took it to their parents and their parents objected to that particular material and decided that they were going to sue me
Mhm.
as a provider of said material, that I can no longer go to court and say, well, this is an educational book that provides medical knowledge about puberty and what happens to the human body during it. I would have to plead my case and say, like, no, like, this is actually not harmful material to kids. But
Wow.
um, think about it in the sense of like not just like me as a librarian getting sued, but also like the waste of municipal resources
Mhm.
that it's going to go into that, because you now have to have a police investigation about it,
Mhm.
because it's going to basically be on par with saying providing actual pornography to children.
Right.
So there has to be a police investigation. I have to deal with whatever repercussions come of it at work, whether that's being on like administrative leave or whatever that comes out of it. The
Yeah.
library is going to take a hit in terms of like public appearance,
Yep.
because now it's going to be like, oh, not only does there's like this white right wing fringe group that's over here saying that we're peddling porn to kids, now here's an actual case where a librarian actually did peddle porn to kids.
Yeah.
And so that is honestly a really big one, and that affects basically anybody. It's not just librarians, it's all educators,
Mhm.
it's teachers, educators, librarians, any doctors even.
Yeah.
So like if a doctor were to supply information that a parent objected to, they could bring suit against that doctor as well.
Geez. So yeah, just in the course of making sure that a person who is under the age of 18, right? These are all defining minors as under 18, which
Yes.
means people who are going through and have gone through puberty, who may have had sex, who are experiencing and sort of like interfacing with all of the risks involved in sexual
Hmm.
contact, or maybe having a medical problem that they don't know how to ask their parents about, anything like that. It puts you and educators and medical providers in danger. Yeah, the cost, that's wild. Also, you risk getting put on like Megyn Kelly or Hannity or whatever,
Hmm.
um, and becoming famous against your will, which is like very dangerous.
For something
Right.
for something that honestly literally like has so little bearing on anything.
Mhm.
Like I it b- it basically it completely boggles my mind that this even got through. But like not
Yeah.
only did it get through, but it got passed like with an overwhelming majority.
Right.
Like it was like a 75-25 split in the house and
So
in
what
the
were the
Senate.
arguments for it? Just,
um
porn, it's about porn?
Basically, again, it's the same talking points that you have with any type of rhetoric surrounding like book bans or libraries and children accessing information, is
Mhm.
that it's all done with this idea that we are somehow protecting the kids
Yeah.
and preventing them from accessing information that is going to be harmful to them. And the problem with that is that, you know like I said, I am not trying to deny anybody's parental rights to raise their kids the way that they want.
Yeah.
No librarian is, no educator is, no medical professional is.
Right.
We I'm full in support of it. I wish more parents would come with their kids to the library instead of just dropping them off and like letting them run free and then getting mad at the librarian for not watching their kid, even though like we're not their babysitter, we're not their caregiver. Like, I have a job to do, and it doesn't involve watching your kid run around the stacks,
Yeah.
screaming like a banshee.
And getting out of the age appropriate section,
Yeah,
right?
like, I am not a bouncer. I'm not gonna keep your kid who's 12 from going up to the 3rd floor of my library and getting into the adult fiction section. Like,
Right.
I have other things to worry
And if
about.
they library bouncer, they better be prepared to pay the salary of one.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it's it's honestly frustrating because it very much comes back to the like what Trent said about the hypersexualization
Mhm.
of children. And it's the idea that, we're out here somehow like making this all about sex and like everything we provide to them is about sex, and it's like,
Mhm.
no, honestly, it's really not. And
Yeah.
the fact that you spend so much time like talking about sex with children like raises a lot of questions with me
Yeah.
as like a human being.
Yeah, you're thinking about the sex lives of teenagers, and that's concerning,
Hmm.
because we were kind of letting them be their own people and be, under the roof of their parents who are supposed to be in charge of them, right? And just giving them information when they say that they need it, right? So,
Right.
and like in the case of things like puberty education, when the sort of social science consensus suggests that they need it. And if you think that your kid needs something special or different, right, if they need to be shielded from that, then it's kind of on you to do the special action of keeping them away from that information. I would rather you didn't do that, right? But we do live in a free country, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, well, we did. So, okay, so that's 412. Big yikes. What else do we have?
So there were a couple bills that passed that pertain to schools and school libraries. The SB 12 and SB 13 are the two big ones that passed the legislative session. They're expected to go into effect on September 1st. Just in time for the new school year,
Cool.
give everybody like the summer of nightmares just to get them in time for the school year of nightmares. But the SB 12 is a parental rights bill that focuses on prohibiting instruction regarding sexual orientation, DEI initiatives. It requires parental consent for sex education. It requires parental input for sex education. So like they get to tell the teachers like what they are allowed to teach regarding sex education. It prevents the schools from assisting with social transitioning. So if you have a kid who would prefer to be known by a different name or a different gender, teachers would not be allowed to do that. They would have to like basically, regard them like with whatever gender they were assigned at birth and whatever name was on their birth certificate, basically. And so that basically gets rid of nicknames. So like you can't.
But they're not going to do that, right? They're going to be totally selective about it.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Cruelty for the sake of cruelty.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also sort of like every
sake.
accusation is a confession, right? Because they're always talking about how they're transing the kids at the school. Charlie Kirk told Gavin Newsom about his own bill. He was like, oh my God, you guys in California, you are preventing teachers from telling families if their kid is having like gender problems, right? And Gavin Newsom has to be like, that's not what the bill says. It says you're not allowed to fire a teacher if they choose not to out their kid to parents who may be abusive. Like that's a different thing completely
different thing.
Completely.
So the ramifications for something like this, obviously very wide reaching in terms of education, but also it has impacts on, say, like a school library, because it means that like you can no longer carry books that are LGBTQIA forward. You can no longer have books that amplify marginalized voices. It's wide reaching. So it's like they're basically turning this into like a white cis heteronormative situation, and it's really it's kind of gross, to be honest with you.
This is so telling, right? Because it's called a parental rights bill. Yeah. So it's all about like we have the right to have a say in our kids' education. And then its function is explicitly to take away a lot of material from every family, not just you. Every single family in a district can now no longer access this material, even if they believe that their children should have the right to see it.
Exactly.
And it's because, like you said, when they say parents and when they say children, they're imagining a married Christian white nuclear family where everybody is cisgender, and everybody conforms to that sort of mode. And they are not thinking about either the children or the parents in a family where you might not meet all of those requirements, right? So they're not considering a kid who thinks that they might be trans and who has no idea that that's even a thing, right? And who can't see any path forward for themselves until they encounter materials that show them that there's a kind of person that you can be that's healthy and safe and happy, right?
Right. Heaven forbid that we want kids to grow up happy, safe, and healthy.
Right.
Right. I mean,
Heaven forbid.
It's an isolation bill. It's a bill designed to isolate and leave no hope, no pathway forward for children. It's difficult to think of legislation more senseless than this, to be honest.
Well, you would think, except SB 13 makes it worse.
All right, what's that one?
Everything bigger in Texas. Hey, Katie.
Pick our
Let's
brains, Katie. Let's hit me.
Okay, so parental rights bill about the type of things that teachers are allowed to talk about in terms of sex education and sexual identity. Let's take it a step further and also prevent librarians from doing their job in accessing the materials that students need to be successful. So um, SB 13 is basically a bill that allows for parental oversight of the library in schools. It requires school districts to provide parents with full access to their children's library records, which
This is
one of
big
the
brother shit right here.
yeah, it's Big Brother. One of the things that you learn, like at any library, and honestly, library school, you talk about library, the first thing you talk about is patron privacy.
Yeah.
So think about like you going into a bank and signing up for a bank account. The only person who has the legal access to that bank account is you.
Mhm.
And this is true for, a parent signing up a minor child for their bank account. Now, usually when you do that, you have to have like like the parent has to sign them up with them and they're also on the account.
Yep.
But the fact remains that's the only people who are able to access the account are the people who are named on the account. And that's the truth with library accounts as well. It's the reason why libraries do not keep records of what you check out, even though
Mhm.
some people wish they would, because they're like, I read this book 2 years ago and I want to know what it was. And you're
Yeah.
like, I don't.
I'm trying to recommend a book to a friend and all I have is like, it was in space. Ugh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically. So it's the reason why we do that is because in the past, information like library records has been used in court cases against people. So
Mm.
like thinking about somebody who might be, say, arrested for planning a school shooting or something like that, and then you go and pull their library records and find out that they were looking at books about how to make pipe bombs and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and they're like, well, that he definitely did it, and he was definitely guilty. We've had situations where husbands are requesting book records for their wives, to put them in unsafe situations. um anything that people want, they think they think it will help them in like whatever feud or battle that they are facing
Mhm.
with people. They will try to get it. And patron privacy is a big one. Like, so when you go into the library, you sign up for a library card. I cannot come in after you and be like, "Hey, like, who was that person?
Mhm.
What books are they checking out?" I have to have, in order for me to release that information, like, you physically have to sign a document that says, "Yes, this person can access my library records,"
Got it.
and or you have to come in with a subpoena,
Mhm.
and a warrant for me to give you that information. And so this is putting patron privacy into like a huge basically conundrum right now, because it's like, well, one, yes, they are minors,
Yeah.
and parents, in most cases have to sign their children up for things. But as a library, as librarians, like, we are not obligated to give that information to anybody. We're not supposed to give that information to anybody.
Yeah.
And
So, like, just because they're minors doesn't give anyone the right to surveil what they are taking out at the
exactly.
library. And
Right.
it's
Or
one of those kind of points where they will say there's a clash here between the rights
mhm,
of the parents to lead their family as opposed to the child's rights and the
Right.
to
parents' rights should
privacy.
win, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um We a good example of this is like saying, like, you have a child who has divorced parents,
Mhm.
and mom takes kid to the library, signs kid up for a library card. Mom is the name listed on the account that is like the caregiver or the guardian or whatever.
Mhm.
And then dad comes in and wants to know what their kid is checking out.
Yeah.
I cannot give dad that information. I don't know
Mhm.
who dad is. Like,
Yeah,
dad,
that's just some guy.
yeah, you're right, that's just some guy. Like, you could say that you're this person's parent, but I have no documented proof saying that
Yeah.
you are. And honestly, that's the case at school libraries too. It's just like, you could have some parent come in and be like, I want to see what my kids are checking out, and you're like, I don't know who
Mhm.
you are. I've
Yeah.
never
Right.
seen you before in my life.
Right. You're not the card holder. Get
Um,
out.
Yeah.
a lot of this whole parental rights discussion, it of course intimates the tyranny of the family over the child, or of
Yeah.
the parents
Mhm.
over the child. And I feel like this part of it doesn't get discussed enough.
Mhm.
And hopefully we can do that moving forward, because the children certainly are humans. They're
Mhm.
certainly not like pieces of property in the sense of like a computer or a hard drive. These are
Right.
people who have their own thoughts, their own
Mhm.
feelings, their own passions, and bills like this seek to objectify them in so many ways.
Yes.
Yeah,
Um,
and it takes away their agency, right?
mhm.
And it is actually a true slippery slope situation, because we've seen in the question of things like trans rights and transitioning and being a kid and a minor and an adult, there have been efforts to try to raise the age from 18 to 25, right?
Right.
Before which you're allowed to make your own decisions about transitioning.
Mhm.
And so it is always kind of available as a next step to take 18 as the bar and move it up even further, when even 18 is much too high, right? Like, to say that you don't have the control or the right to privacy until you're 18 years old is completely out of whack with our values, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it doesn't match really what happens in the case of things like medicine, right? You have the right to privacy after like age 13, I think,
Mhm.
in medicine. And you get to choose if you authorize your parents
Mhm.
to access that information. So it's really wild to see moves to make 18 years old be the age under which you have to submit to the adults in your family checking up on what you've been reading.
But this is a part, I think, of this whole project.
Mm,
It's we look at it from the different perspective
yeah,
of stopping intellectual freedom, of stopping, but it's because they hate that children have more agency.
right.
You've heard it before.
About
Like the child, they can sue their parents now, right? There's this
Mhm.
like great outrage in a certain type of individual over the fact that a child can be like, hey, I'm in a bad situation and like this isn't good.
This is where I recommend again that everybody read Wild Faith by Talia Levin, which is about the evangelical attitude towards the children.
Mhm.
And it truly is not just about the right of parents to control the spiritual development of their children, but to control their behavior in all ways, and in fact to abuse them physically and
Mhm.
emotionally, right? This
Yes.
is about absolutely nobody, not even the state, should get in between me and my right to beat a child until they are traumatized for life. But we interrupted you, right? We just got to the part of SB 13 that's about surveillance, but there's more to it, right?
There sure is. I know we talked a little bit in the last episode about collection development, and we really
Mm.
only like kind of like skimmed the surface, and really
Yeah,
only
we're
talked about
gonna
it.
go into detail in a little
Oh,
bit, hopefully.
it's like a whole presentation.
I can't wait.
But one of the things that SB 13 does is it allows parents to create lists of materials that their children are not allowed to check out. It creates specific categories of prohibited materials, and it mandates that school districts are required to develop policies that prohibit these materials. School districts can delegate that responsibility out to a local library council made up of parents who will have significant input on how books are purchased and what books are purchased for a school library.
Okay.
So collection development in the library world is like a huge function of any librarian's job. It's about um, the acquisition, the curation of the materials in a library that are able to circulate or not circulate or people can access. And so you think about like how books get into the library and what happens there. That is literally one a person's job is to do that. And the idea that a parent who has no background in libraries, who has no
Mhm.
concept of like the work it takes to review and purchase and get everything into the library and available for kids and students, making those kinds of decisions like really upsets me. Like
Well,
for
and also there's organizations like Parents' Rights in Education. We have a chapter here in Oregon, and their whole mission is to train angry, racist, bigoted parents
Mhm.
to take these kinds of leadership roles and abuse them to deprive everyone of
Well,
materials.
Well, this is just an extension of of the notion that lay folks can run any institution.
Mhm.
That the government is not too difficult for idiots to run. So
Yeah, the
obviously,
Doge
like
boys are doing a
libraries,
great job.
right, right. Like cat turd is killing it, right? So like obviously anybody can do it, but this is just an extension of that as it concerns teachers and librarians. And of
Yes.
course, it's incorrect, but the damage that is
Yeah.
done from innovations like that. I mean, societally changing. No.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, shall we watch James Tallarico challenge SB 13?
Yeah.
All right, let's roll the clip.
If we pass your bill, could Romeo and Juliet be banned because it mentions premarital sex, which someone might find, quote, against their local community values?
There may be some. There may be some that, whether their own individual value system or their religious beliefs, that could believe that.
If your answer to could Romeo and Juliet be banned, if your answer is anything other than of course not, then that's a serious problem.
I'm not advised on Romeo and Juliet.
Do you think prostitution is profane and inconsistent with community values?
I think that prostitution could be relayed in the context of whatever the work is before us in terms of a work of literature or content.
Under the language of your bill, profane and inconsistent with community values, Lonesome Dove, my favorite book, a Texas classic, could be banned because it includes references to prostitution in the Old West. Is that correct?
The community values or community standards of an individual community would dictate that.
So it is possible.
And again, it's possible. But
do you think the F word is grossly offensive language?
I do.
Under the language of your bill, The Catcher in the Rye, an American classic, could be banned because it includes more than 300 curse words, including the F word.
That could happen, yes.
That classic work of literature could be removed from libraries if we pass this bill.
Well, I think we're closing the door to some of the filth that we have heard read before our committee over the last two sessions.
We're not removing filth under your bill. We're removing Romeo and Juliet, which I don't consider filth.
Well,
we're removing Lonesome Dove, which I don't consider filth. Things like Romeo and Juliet and Lonesome Dove and The Catcher in the Rye will be removed from school libraries because the definitions are overly broad.
Yeah, he wants to make it about filth, right? But ultimately, what is filth, right? It's the same problem of pornography that we've always had, right? I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. Well, no, you don't, right?
Right.
And yeah, this whole question of he keeps bringing it back to individuals, right? Well, it's about the individual value system and kind of skating over the idea that it's actually really about the right of any random individual, no matter how bazonkers their worldview might be, to impose a standard on everyone else in their district.
And of course, this is like heavily ironic because the individual value system was the system that was in place when books were readily available. And as was just noted, a parent could have the ability, if they were overly domineering, to be like, I don't want you to read The Catcher in the Rye or Romeo and Juliet. But
yeah, Catcher in the
not
Rye
that.
doesn't just have swear words, it also has a prostitute in it. So that's
Yeah, I was like, it also has sex in it. Like,
yeah.
okay. But, that comes back to the idea of parental rights in the sense, like in the shifting ideology when it comes to that, because it's, for somebody who goes to school and might come across like a book that, they might find objectionable. It would be up to the parent to say like, hey, like I really don't want my kid reading Catcher in the Rye because it contains these things. And, it would be a conversation that the teacher would have specifically with their kid's teacher. And they would figure out what they needed to do in that particular situation to, to do something different. I mean, I didn't have that situation, but I did have a situation where I read a book in class, or I was assigned a book in class, and I had already read it. And I said, "Well, is there something else I can do? Because like I've already read this book. I've read it multiple times. Like I read it 2 years
Yeah.
ago. Do you want me to continue doing the assignments for this, or do you want me to do something different?" And I was assigned a different book to read.
Yeah. That happened to
Um,
me too. Wow. I mean, that really said something about the kind of kids that we were.
yeah, for sure.
That were like,
Um,
"Yeah, you've assigned me a book, but I already read it for pleasure. Sorry."
yeah. But nowadays, but it was never an infringement on the entire class. Like the class could read Catcher in the Rye, and that kid or that student would just be assigned a different task or a different project or whatever in order to basically get the same experience or the same grade without necessarily being exposed to whatever harmful material that their parent deemed so. But
Yeah.
now it's like, well, we can't have any kids exposed
Yeah.
to that.
So
And
it's
it doesn't
actually taken away the flexibility and the
yeah, it's
individual rights
it
that
it's
yeah.
taken away the right of other parents to say like, "Yes, I want my kid to read Catcher in the Rye because it is an American classic and I love JD Salinger."
Yeah.
And I think honestly, that is it's super crazy to me that that's the level that it's gone to. But I know we talked a little bit about this in the last episode about how this kind of parental rights movement also showcased up in like the 1950s when we were talking
Mhm.
about desegregation. And
Yeah.
they're like, well, we shouldn't have to have white kids and black kids in the same school. And
Yeah,
it's like,
it's my right as a parent of a white child not to have them ever have to sit in the same classroom as a black child, right? That's
exactly.
not your right, actually. There are rights that you don't have, and those
Mhm.
are some of them, right?
Yeah. You don't
Right.
have the right to infringe your opinion on me,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay, so then we also had HB 3225, which didn't make it.
But not because of a vote.
Oh,
It didn't make it because, Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor, he had there was a procedural error in terms of, like, the bill showing up in the Senate to be voted on because it did pass the
wow.
House, and it showed up in the Senate to get a vote on. House Bill 3225 was the big public library bill that we were, like waiting with bated breath to see what would happen because it was going to completely change the landscape of public libraries in Texas.
So this
Um,
could come back next session?
this it could come back next session. In fact, I think they've already listed it as something that they want to pursue.
So it's just
Um,
a sword hanging over your
it's
head.
just it's just there. So House Bill 3225 was had broad language concerning sexually explicit material, and basically prohibited that type of material being placed in areas designated for minors.
Mhm.
Um, and libraries were going to have to implement like age verification measures to prevent minors from checking out or accessing those materials without.
E-bouncers is what you're saying.
Yeah. Um, we would have to review our collections annually to make sure that we were removing or relocating these types of materials. If an incident was being brought forth, it was like a $10,000 civil penalty for every incident of this happening. Um, and we would have to basically sign documentation saying that, like, yes, we definitely did this. Otherwise, we would no longer be eligible for state grant funding,
Cool.
which is for most libraries, especially rural libraries in Texas, is a primary source of funding for them.
So of course
Um,
it hits the rural populations harder, right? That's what they want.
yes. So effectively, what this bill would do is it bans minors from accessing the public library if they did not have a parent with them,
Okay.
or if the library could not guarantee a separation of materials. Um, So thinking about my system, like our central library, our downtown library has 3 floors, and the first floor is basically like children's and like I would say like the new materials. So like there's like a mix of like adult and the large print and like serials, so like magazines and newspapers that are in that main area, but it's mostly the children's section of the
Mhm.
library. And there's a wall that separates like the children's section from like the rest of the library. So like, you're going into the children's section, it's very clear that you're going into the children's section.
Yeah.
The second floor is a mix of, say, like adult and teen/YA. And the YA section has a wall that separates it from the rest of the adult section. So it's very clear that you're walking into the teen area, basically. And then the third floor is basically all adult. So in that case, we could sit there and say, like, yeah, there's separation. Like, you could go into the teen area and only see teen materials. You can go into the children's area and only see children's materials.
Yeah.
However, looking at the 6 other libraries in our system, they're all like single story open floor plans layouts.
It's just signs that tell you where you are.
Yeah, there's signs that say, like, this is adult, this is YA, this is children's. And the YA section is right next to the adult section. I cannot guarantee that a child going into the YA section is not going to accidentally stumble upon an adult book that contains sexual content.
The next shelf over.
The next shelf over. So with that, it's like I said, we would have to basically ban minors from entering those spaces unless they had a parent or guardian with them to make sure that they were not like accessing material that was harmful.
You're going to have to build the wall inside of your library.
Inside my library.
I mean, not to intersect us with anything untoward here, but it sounds like they would like a forbidden section of the library,
the restricted section,
right?
Yeah,
like you got to sneak into that stuff like after dark.
And as we know from reading the book series, the Harry Potter book series, no children ever got into the restricted section or accessed a book they weren't allowed to.
Right, exactly.
It worked so well.
Okay, so can you... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and then like the age verification situation, it would be effectively having, say, like a bouncer on the adult, like say on the 3rd floor of our library, checking IDs to make sure that you are in fact an adult. And you're like, no, it's like our budget is already stretched so thin that we can't even get the employees that we need in order to run the library, let alone pay for a
now
bouncer.
You need like a dedicated guy on a stool being like, driver's license, please, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
What's this, buddy? Dr. Faust? Aren't you a little bit too young for Dr. Faust, pal? Right? Like, chill out.
Well, and it's like they will either have to have a parent or guardian with them, or like they will not be able to leave the children's section. Like, so you're talking about teenagers who would be restricted to a juvenile section of the library that contains materials for kids 12 and under.
Yeah,
and
you can read Where is Spot? You can read Magic Tree House.
Yeah, you could read the Boxcar Children.
Yeah.
Oh, you think Magic Treehouse is gonna be safe from all this stuff?
Oh, no, I do not.
Magic Treehouse. The only magic is through Christ, actually. So gonna need us
not Morgana or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you set up this clip that we have? We've got a line of questioning about this House bill that is trying to corner its proponents, right?
Yes. So in this particular dialogue, you have one person who is asking the author of the bill to define specific terms that he used in the bill, basically for public record of like, you need to define this term that you use, this language in your bill.
Yeah.
And honestly, the best part about this bill is that he basically refuses because he's like, well, there's children in the audience, and she's
so
like,
yeah,
but
you're the one masochism is or bestiality or whatever. Yeah,
it's like, but you're the one who authored this bill, and you have to define these terms because otherwise it's too ambiguous.
Okay, so let's go into it. Oh, and the speaker also has an extensive track record prosecuting like child trafficking and abuse cases, right? So she's like extremely intimate with the idea of protecting children from sexualization. So let's go.
Representative Alders, masturbation. Do we know what that is?
We do.
You do as well as she does. No.
Ms. Johnson, I would suggest that you're proving my point.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
I would suggest you're proving my point.
No.
There are children on this floor, and there are children in the gallery, and children can watch this, and you want to put it out in front of them on the record.
You
That's fine.
put this on the floor, not me.
I am
you put this on the
suggesting
floor.
all of.
And you're suggesting the ignorance around a topic without having a legitimate public policy debate. And I would
I'm
suggest to
suggesting
you,
ignorance on the topic.
yeah, are you really suggesting that a book that explains to a teenage boy who's lost his father what masturbation means shouldn't be in a public library?
Did you read the bill?
I did.
It does not say anywhere that it shouldn't be in a public library. It says it shouldn't belong in the minors section.
And your definition of minor is under the age of 18.
That is correct. That's the legal definition of a minor. You can take that up with the federal government, I guess, but I don't. It's not. This bill is not addressing that.
Doesn't a public library have different sections of the library?
It absolutely does.
But you're not only redefining what they can do, but you're imposing a civil penalty on every public library. You're not differentiating between pornography or something inappropriate. You have included in this definition of some which you don't like the words I read that you brought to this body in public with something that is basic teenage health.
This is not basic teenage health, Ms.
Masturbation
Johnson.
is not basic teenage health. Do you really, as a young man,
No,
want to
I do
describe
not.
to me when you needed to learn about that?
Please ask the question again.
Yeah. I'm trying to separate out the flag waving.
So that was Ann Johnson. And I think people who are listening just to the audio version don't get to experience the fun of every time they pan back to Representative Alders, he's got more people behind him. Like every time there's like additional people just being like, I don't know about this. And like, I know what masturbation is. Do you know what masturbation is? Like,
It should
it's
be in
so
the adult section. Like, yeah, like why should the teaching children about sexual health be in the adult section for the child who doesn't have a father to get the book out of the adult section? I mean,
well, yeah, it's like you said, Katie, right? That like you could be, 15, 16 years old and struggling with a question and not have access to a trusted adult who can help you with that. And he's sitting there being like, well, you're a minor because you're not 18. Which is just simply not how libraries work, right? Like you said, there's at the very least two categories of, young, like 12 and under versus YA, right? Or like, young adults. And then also the idea that like it should be at all entrusted to the hands of these giggling children behind the podium there or the lectern, right? Who are just like, okay, don't make me say what masturbation is. Like, these guys shouldn't be anywhere near teenagers, first of all, and they shouldn't be anywhere near rules about who can learn about what, because clearly they have not learned enough.
Yeah. Honestly, the most infuriating part of watching that video is just like, honestly, the smirk that he has on his face of just like, oh, like she's going to make me force me to define what sexual bestiality is. And I'm like, yeah, because that was the language that you included in your bill. And if you're going to include it in your bill, you better be adult enough to talk about it. Right. Because then if you can't talk about it, then you shouldn't be legislating it.
Yeah. Also, when there are sensitive topics being discussed on the floor, they send the children out. Like they have that option to kind of clear the floor of non-representatives, right? And they just chose not to do that so that then they could say like, no, there's children here. We can't talk about masturbation or sadomasochism. Like we have to protect the children now.
It's really funny that you bring that up because we actually had a similar situation happen at one of our city council, like one of our library council meetings, library advisory board, when they were debating. Well, it wasn't really debating. It was mostly just people coming out and protesting the inclusion of a specific book in the collection. This book was a graphic novel that was, I would say, honestly, a little racy. And
was it queer?
It was not genderqueer.
Oh, wow.
But
a different graphic novel.
It's a book called Pervert. And it actually won an Eisner Award, which is, the big awards for graphic novels and graphic artists who deal with that. And like I said, the book itself is about a trans person's experience in prostitution. And so, say what you want about it. Like it's not really my bag, but I'm sure someone out there wanted to have that kind of experience. Obviously, it was well regarded in the graphic novel community because it won awards for it.
Mhm.
It was included in our library, and the situation basically started out at a city council meeting where someone came up and said that their teenage person got their hands on this and that they found it in the teen section of the library. And I
Mhm.
remember because I got a call from my boss at like 9:30 p.m. that
Oh, wow.
night. It was like, "What can you tell me about this book?" And I was like, oh, hold on. Let me figure this out. And what we basically in our investigation, what we found out was that the book was not in the teen section. It
Right.
was listed as an adult graphic novel. If it
Mhm.
was found in the teen section, it was found there either on purpose or accidentally, like somebody picked it up and put it down someplace and just forgot about it, which happens. I mean, like we're not perfect. Like sometimes things get misshelved.
Yeah.
And so that was big number one. I was like, it's not a YA graphic novel. It was not ever supposed to be in that section. It was always supposed to be in the adult section.
Mhm.
And the number two thing that we found out was that the person who checked out the book originally checked it out on an adult card.
Mm.
So at our library, we have a designation between the different types of library cards. So we have
Yeah.
like a juvenile, we have a teen card, and we have an adult card. And when parents register their minor children card, they get to select how much access they have. So again, putting it back on the onus back on the parent of like, if you want your kid to have restricted access, you can make that choice. Like we're not going
Yeah.
to make it for you. But parents can also choose to give their children full access to the library and they can check out whatever they want. So
Right.
this
Mhm.
was out on a card that was registered to an adult patron that had adult access, and it was
Mhm.
checked out to say like the 13-year-old kid that this person said it was checked out to.
Got
Um,
it.
and that kind of became like the rallying cry for these right-wing fringe groups to come in and basically harass our city council, harass our
Sure.
library
Why
board.
are you giving pornography to children? Blah, blah, blah.
Right. Well,
And one instance, they actually took pictures from this book. They photocopy pictures, which like we can get into an argument about copyright infringement and everything, but they took pictures from they blew them up and they put them on poster boards and we're showing poster boards in the library
mm,
meetings, in the city council meetings of these like um, basically graphic representations of sex.
Yeah.
Um, our library advisory board has a youth representative on it.
So they showed pornography to children. Well, not pornography, but they showed sexual material that is restricted to adult library cards to children
Yeah,
on purpose.
on purpose.
Cool.
but
All right.
again, it's like we spoke with Maureen Kasi about just a conversation ago. A lot of this protection actually centers around we think you're too stupid to be
Mhm.
Yeah.
able to function by yourself. So
Let us control you. Yeah.
we have to control everything, and it's from women to children to the
Okay. Incredibly, we're starting to run out of time, but I really, 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 really want to walk through the library collection management, like how it actually works, right? Because everyone likes to have opinions about
Yeah.
it, and they are not librarians. They do not work in libraries. They do not know.
right.
So, I'm an author. I have written a book. It is called Larry Porber and the Smart Guy Rock, and I want to see it in my local library. What do I do, Katie?
So there's a couple different things. One, you can go, your traditionally published route and get an agent, send it off to a publishing house, and do that whole process, get it published and sent out to the library that way. So one of the things that they talk about is like, oh, well, you guys have like content that's harmful for kids in the library, and you guys don't do your due diligence to make sure that it doesn't get put out on the shelf. So part of publishing is making that kind of discernment in terms of like the age appropriateness of a specific book. So
Mhm.
like you write a manuscript, you have an idea of your audience, right? Like if I'm writing an adult manuscript, I'm not going to be like, yeah, teens can read this. This is good for teens.
Right.
Right.
You're going to find an agent who works with that type of material. Like you're not going to go to the adult mystery author agent for your picture book.
Yeah.
They're going to find you a publishing house that also deals with that type of material. And during the editing process, the editing process is going to have like revision after revision after revision. You're going to have line edits, and you're going to have discussions and like changes and everything else. And you're going to come to an agreement that this is a book that is determined for this specific age group. And during the marketing process, they are going to market that book to people and booksellers and libraries that handle that specific material. You're not going to market picture books to an academic library. You're not going to market picture books to a law library, because that is not the type of people that they serve. They
Yeah.
don't
Right.
serve children. And so you're not going to find that type of material being marketed to them. Now, I, as a public librarian, I get so many pitch emails about like, hey, this new book is coming out, like you should buy this for your library. And like I get messages from like our book vendors. It's like, here are the 20 books that you need to buy in the next month. And
Yeah.
I get free books all the time from publishers saying like, read this book and include it in your library. And like I said, it's all coming with the idea like this book is designed, it was written, was marketed to specifically for, say, adult readers or teenage readers or kids ages 8 to 12. We
Mhm.
get that information when the book comes to us in these pitch emails. When the book gets published, we go to our book vendor website, and it says on the book vendor website that this is a book for 4 to 8-year-olds or 8 to 12-year-olds, or 13 to 17, and sometimes even
Right.
16 to 18, like on those high end like teenage YA books.
Mhm.
So it's like we know when we purchase a book like what the intended audience is. So we use that information, and we look at what other libraries are doing in terms of like how they are putting, like how they're cataloging things, to say like, okay, so like the publisher says that this is a YA book. Other libraries we see, they actually have it cataloged in the adult because of some of the content. A good example of this, and the one that comes up quite frequently, is the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas.
Sure.
And that book, because of where Sarah J. Maas was in her publishing career at that point in time, she was already being marketed as a YA author. And she wrote this series that can actually be classified as what they call new adult, which is more along the lines of like an adult book, but like the protagonists are typically like in their early 20s. And so there was some
This
they
is like
marked.
another category, older than young adult, but not like,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, and not me.
It's a little, it's like the idea of like young adult is actually a little bit more nuanced than people understand, because YA, young adult, to me means a young adult. So it's somebody who is over the age of 18,
Mhm.
and like I said, is in their early 20s. But
Mhm.
I also think about like what I would designate as like teen fiction or
Right,
teen
something like The
materials.
Hunger Games.
Yes, that is written specifically for teenagers that are
Yeah.
under the age of 18. And so now you have like this like teen category, you have YA, you have new adult, but like new adult is more what I would consider like young adult not fan fiction, like it's all fiction, young adult fiction, where it's for people who are like basically brand new adults. So they're 18, 19, 20 years old. The protagonists are 18, 19, 20 years old. And that's kind of where that fits in.
Mhm.
And so Court of Thorns and Roses is very, very much in that new adult category, except that because Sarah J. Maas was a very like popular YA author, when they first started publishing that series, they published it as a young adult book,
Mhm.
even though it definitely, like, the protagonist in the first book is 19 years old
Mhm.
and, deals with things that 19-year-olds would deal with,
Mhm.
Right.
um, which includes sexual activity.
Mhm.
And so there's been a lot of like back and forth about whether or not that series actually should be shelved in the YA section or should be shelved in, say, like the adult section because of the content.
Mhm.
And it varies based on the library. There's some people that are saying like, well, the publisher says that it's YA, so it should be in the YA section. The books that came later in the series that are definitely like increased, like in terms of like the sexual and violent content, like should be shelved in the house, like in the adult section. You have run into an issue of like, well, now you've split up the series where part of it's in YA and part of it's in adult, and it should be like in either one or the other. And it's like, what do you do in that particular situation? So like there's like situations like that do happen where there's a disagreement between like what the publisher says like appropriate age is and like what you actually see in terms of like the content. But that being said, like we don't know that until we've read the book. And so when you get to like say the collection development piece of it, when we're looking at purchasing a book for a library, there's a whole list of things that we're looking at in terms of how like what we end up buying. The very first thing that we look at is our community makeup. Every library has done a needs assessment or like a community assessment that looks at like, okay, so like what is your primary demographic? Like my community is very diverse. There is not one specific race or age or anything that is like the predominant race. In the last library, we were a predominantly Hispanic community, and we catered specifically to that. So we had a very sizable like Spanish and bilingual collection, like across all types of media. So because that's what our community was saying that they wanted and needed. So here, our big thing is that we are like 21% of our population is foreign born individuals that have immigrated to the United States. And because of that, we have a large number of people who live in our city that do not speak English as a first language. They speak a language other than English at home. If they know how to speak English, it's not they are not fluent in it, and we have to provide materials to help them access the information that they need, which is why we have one of the largest world languages collection in our area. And we include things like Spanish, French, German, Korean, Mandarin, Japanese, Vietnamese, Hebrew. Like we have a Braille collection because we have a sizable blind population as well. And so it's we look at that. We look at the community makeup and trying to determine like what types of materials that we need. So like that's the very first thing. Like in my last library,
what do people want to check out?
what do you want to check out? And at my last library, like we would not purchase books that for people who spoke Mandarin or Korean or Japanese because they did not exist in that community, unfortunately. So that's like the most important facet of like any type of collection development policy is like, what is your community made of? What are their needs? What are their interests? And that's how you make a big determination. From there, it gets into like a lot of like really like kind of minute detailing in terms of like what we look for a book. So we look at like the author's reputation, their significance in the literary world. Authors that have poor reputations generally do not get purchased. We look at, like I said, the suitability of the subject. We look at the style of the book in terms of its intended audience. So again, back to what the publisher says. The publisher says that this is a board book intended for kids under the age of 4. And I look at it and I'm just like, there is too much like nuance and like metaphor in here that like there's no 4-year-old, no child alive is going to pick up on this. So this book is like, it might be a board book in the sense that you made it out of cardboard and made it look like a board book, but it is not appropriate for 4-year-olds.
Sure. So it's the librarians that are discussing amongst themselves about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Customer demand is a big one. So like this is how a lot of like indie and self-published books end up in the libraries is when people are requesting copies of those books. Now sometimes it might be a situation where like say somebody who is self-published or published through like an indie publishing house that we can't get a physical copy. They've only done like an ebook copy. And people are like, well, I want a physical copy. And I'm like, it doesn't exist. I'm sorry. We look at the value of the resource. This actually comes into play with things that are out of print. The big one up until recently for me was the Babysitters Club. And the Babysitters Club is still like a perennial favorite for kids. And up until the Netflix show came out, they did not do a reprint of the original series. So we were like holding on to the books with like as tightly as we could. We're like, please do not damage this. Do not tear it up. Like I need this to come back. I need this to come back in the condition that it was left in, because
you look each child in the eye and say, like, treat this like it's your baby.
Like I cannot get another copy of this. We were having to rely on like interlibrary loans and reciprocal borrowing to get like parts of the
Oh my
series,
gosh.
because we couldn't like I would have like books 1, 5, and 7, and then like another library would have book 2, and then another library would have book 3, and they're like, why do I have to wait for this? And I'm like, because I didn't do a reprint. I'm sorry.
Is it somewhere else? Yeah.
So that's also part of it. We look at reviews. We look at book reviews because we cannot read every single thing that comes into the library. Like, it's physically impossible. Just in my library alone, we have over 600,000 materials, and it's like the amount of work that you would need to put into it in order to take care of that would be
It's
astronomical,
unreasonable. Yeah.
unreasonable.
Each
And so
individual do that.
so we rely on book reviews, usually through like professional reviewing sites like Kirkus, to
Yeah.
provide us with like an overview and like generally like critical reception of the book.
Yeah.
And we look at like where these reviews are specifically coming from. Like, Kirkus is generally well regarded as like basically the professional reviewing site.
Okay.
But we also look at like Publishers Weekly. We look at like School Library Journal and Library Journal. Those reviews are written by like professionals, but not like professional reviewers. They're written by like librarians and teachers. So like people who would have like a better understanding of like what makes a good book, as opposed to like the person who wrote like the 5-star review on Amazon.
Sure. My niece wrote this book, and I think it's swell.
I think it's great. We
Or
also
I'll
look
look on reviews that are like 5 stars. It came undamaged.
yeah, or 1 star. I got this, and the page was torn out, and I'm like,
Yeah, that's not
great.
about the book.
We look at the timeliness of it, especially when it comes to like nonfiction type things. So like
Sure.
if it's like a current issue that people are seeking more information on, we're looking at, was it something that was published recently, or was it something that was published 10 years ago? There are different requirements in terms of like curating collections when it comes to like the types of books and how long you should keep them on the shelf when accessing information. And we also look at like the permanency of a specific title. Like, is this book a classic? Can it be considered a classic? Is it going to be something that's like a perennial favorite amongst basically the majority of people in the community? And this is like not an exhaustive list. This is just like a few of the criteria that we would look at for a book. Decisions are not limited to that list. We are basically have to look at the collection as a whole, in terms of like what are we doing with this particular purchase. Like, is this something that is going to meet a demand? Is it something that is going to fill an information gap? Is it something that has like permanency, that we know that it's going to check out seasonally for the next 10 years? And we can make judgment calls based on a bunch of different factors. Like, for example, typically speaking, like indie books or self-published books are not going to be professionally reviewed. They're not going to have a write-up in Kirkus or School Library Journal or Library Journal or anything like that. They're going to be mostly word of mouth and your list of Goodreads reviews and Amazon reviews. But if you have a high customer demand for it, then that's going to outweigh the need to have a professional review. And we make those kinds of judgment calls. We do budget allocations based on what we see are the needs. We just actually did a diversity audit for our library. And basically what that means is we look at the entire collection and figure out like, do the books we have on the shelf, is it representative of the community makeup that we have? Is it representative of other libraries of our shape and size? Is it representative of like industry standards, basically, and making sure that we do not have any information gaps? So that
Well, thanks to our president, you will not be allowed to do that kind of DEI stuff anymore. You're gonna just do white books for white people
and
the
Christian books for
country
Christian
will be
people.
safe.
Yeah.
That's right. And no one else needs to read. What are they doing reading?
So
No
yeah,
point.
it's a lot of it's almost like a really cool puzzle that you get to figure out. Which is why like there's people like this is their job, but they're dedicated to helping curate these collections, because like
Yeah, but Tiffany Justice could do it better, I think.
yeah. I mean,
Random mom from
it's not just a matter of like putting a book in a cart and like paying for it. There's
Right.
research. You have to do research on every single title. Like, I am responsible for like juvenile and teen collections at my library, and sometimes when I go and see like, okay, like here's a book series that we have, and they may have like 20, like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, for example, has like
Yeah.
20 books in the series now. And
Yeah.
when the new Diary of a Wimpy Kid book comes out, like I know because I've had my hands in that collection that, yeah, I'm going to buy that book because like, of course I'm going to buy that book.
The kids are clamoring for the new Diary of the
New
Wimpy
Diary of
Kid.
Wimpy Kids, but the one that really hurt me was when I had to get basically pull our the Redwall series for removal
Oh no.
because it had not circulated in like 6 years.
Okay, so let this begin our campaign to remind America about Redwall and that you should request it from your library because it's very good.
It's
Yes.
very good, but it's also, 20, 30 years old at this point, and it's one of those it is
Yeah, but little mice with swords are forever.
you're not wrong. Like I fully support this, but again, when it comes to like these purchasing decisions and honestly removing when like we have to go and like remove books from the library, again, it comes down to us being objective. Like we're not trying to push an agenda and say like, oh, you should read Redwall because it's
Right.
good, and like the political machinations of rodents is like fantastic, but
But it is.
it but we have to be objective about it. Like we're looking
Yeah.
at quantitative data. So like if I
Right, and sometimes it breaks your heart.
it breaks my heart because I'm like,
Yeah.
like we're not going to have this book in our library because like nobody wanted to check it out for the last 6
Yeah.
years.
Right.
Well, Katie, this was amazing. We have to close it down, but I am so glad that we got that little peek into,
Thank you so
the
much.
acquisition part, of collection management, and thank you so much for giving us the level of detail that you did and giving us these amazing updates. Well, I'll say amazing, but, pretty depressing updates about what's been happening in the Texas legislature. We'll keep our eye out for that bill to come back, and we'll cover it when it does.
Absolutely.
As always, thank you so much for being here, Katie.
Thank you,
As always,
Katie.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you again for having me on.
We'll see you later. This has been Half the Answer, where understanding a question is half the answer. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Half the Answer, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Half the Answer anywhere you get your podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely listener and subscriber-funded publication, which includes programs like Half the Answer and Neon Liberalism. So, if you like what you've heard and wish to contribute, you may do so at liberalcurrents.com and through Patreon. And remember, understanding a question is half the answer.